Pop quiz, here we go. Let's see if you remember. We're going through this 7-part series on the 7 markers of a disciple. Do you remember what week 1 was? If you really need to, you can always Google it too. I'm not opposed to open book. So let's see if you remember.
Know God before me, or before him.
Right? So yeah, Exodus chapter 20, right? The idea of first marker is, do you trust Jesus unconditionally? That's the first question. Next one, let's see. Do you remember this one? I'm not even going to comment on that one, yeah. I have a certain I have a certain opinion about Macintosh. Anyway, that's another story. All right, so first one was trust Jesus unconditionally. So that leads to, if you're trusting someone, what do you normally do, huh? Following is part of it. Right? Who influences you? How much time do you spend with them, right? Who influences you? So if you're following Jesus unconditionally, then you're spending more time with him so that he can influence you. All right, not too bad so far. What about this one? Do you remember this? Sorry? Community? What about community? Huh? Working together? Well, that's today. That's not yet. You're jumping ahead a little bit. So if you're trusting Jesus unconditionally, you're spending time with him so that he can influence you. But as part of that, then, who do you also spend time with? Other people, right? Gathering regularly. Okay. So remember, I'm going to quiz you every so often. So if you need to go back and review some of these, feel free to. So here's a question for you. I want you to name a great contributor in the Old Testament. So Moses, yeah, well, who else? David, Abraham. Sorry, who? Elijah, yeah. The prophet, not the one up there. Yep. Isaiah, okay. Any others you want to throw out there?
What do you mean by contributor? Like who wrote them or who?
Well, there's a broad definition to what contributor means. Micah, yeah. Joseph, Samson, Ruth, yeah. Gideon, okay, there's a lot of you. This is fun. Okay, so here, let me see if you can recognize this one. Now, I'll grant it that this picture is not the greatest, but we'll see. Who do you think this might be? I know, like I said, the picture's not the greatest picture. It's not the greatest rendition. All right, so I'll give you a hint. This comes from Exodus chapter 31. All right, I'm going to ask if one of you, or maybe even 4 of you, want to read a verse each, feel free to. All right, so this is Exodus chapter 31, verses 1 to 4. Anyone want to read?
Then the Lord said to Moses,
Okay.
look, I have specifically chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, grandson of Hur, of the tribe of Judah.
Anyone else?
I have filled him with the Spirit of God, giving him great wisdom, ability, and expertise in all kinds of crafts.
He is a master craftsman, expert in working with gold, silver, and things.
Okay, so who do you think that person was in the picture? Right? Bezalel. Now, Bezalel is not a person that you normally hear about, right? It's a person that, on one hand, it's not someone that people are very familiar with. And yet his influence, his contribution was huge. Even 2 weeks ago, when we were looking at the tabernacle, he was the one that basically helped orchestrate the creation of the tabernacle. So his influence has been there for centuries, and yet no one knows his name. Like, think about some of the things that he was responsible for. This is actually verses 7 to 11, okay? So he's responsible for the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark's cover, and all the furnishings in the tabernacle, the table, utensils, the golden lampstand with all its accessories, the incense altar, the altar of burnt offering and all the utensils, the basin, the wash basin and its stand, the garments, so the ones that Aaron wore as the priest. Again, a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned that and what it looked like. I gave you a picture of what that is and what his sons would wear, the anointing oil, the fragrant incense. And so Bezalel, with all the other people who were entrusted with that, created this. And so you look at that, and sometimes, here's the thing, right? When we think about people who make an impact on the church in the world, right? We think of people, some of the ones that you mentioned, people like Moses and Abraham and David, all these kind of what we might consider heroes of the faith, right? Or spiritual giants. And yet, the work of people like Bezalel is just as significant. We may not remember, but the impact of that work actually resonates for centuries. I mean, think about it. The things that he created during Moses' time, several centuries later, is the same one that David carried and Solomon carried into the temple. Same thing. That's the legacy of Bezalel and the people that he worked with. And notice, actually, I'm going to jump back here a little bit. So, notice that he's chosen. On the one hand, there's a few things that qualify him for this. Right? That the Spirit of God is with him, that he has wisdom, ability, and expertise in crafts. Right? He's a master craftsman. He has both the skills, but also the wisdom in how to use them. And for many things, you need both. You may have the skills, but you may not have the wisdom. Some of you may know what's best to do, but you may not have the skills. I remember, this is back in 2011, I went on a short-term mission trip down to the Dominican Republic. We were helping, one of the things that we were doing was to help with various minor renovation projects. And for those of you who know me, my skills suck. It was so bad, we were trying to lay bricks, it was so bad that the nationals looked at me and said, you know what, we'll do the job, thank you. Right? Some wisdom, maybe, definitely no skill. And yet Bezalel and the group that is brought around him, they have both, and they used both. Let's try this. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. All right, who do you think this is? This is New Testament. I'll give you a hint there. This is a New Testament. Who do you think this is? Oh, that's pretty good. Right? Well, exactly, right? So you can read about this in Acts chapter 6, verse 2, in Acts chapter 6 and 7. But specifically, we want to look at verses 2 to 6. And again, I'm going to ask someone, or a few of you, if you want, you can read one verse each. Someone want to read?
So the 12 called a meeting of all the believers. They said, we apostles should spend our time teaching the word of God, not running a food program.
And so, brothers, select 7 men who are well respected and are full of spirit and wisdom. We will give them this responsibility.
Then we apostles can spend our time in prayer and teaching the word.
Everyone liked this idea, and they chose the following: Stephen, a man full of faith in the Holy Spirit; Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, Nicholas of Antioch, an early
And so in this particular point of history, this is the part where Jesus has already come, he has died, he has been resurrected, he has now gone back to heaven. And so now the people are starting, and so what Jesus has already been establishing through the disciples, what we call the apostles, they are now starting to establish this kingdom on earth, what God has been talking about all along. And as they're doing this, one of the things that comes up is that as they are caring for different people, there's two different groups. There are the widows of those with Jewish descent and widows of those who are Greek descent. And one of the things is as they were starting to distribute the different means to the widows, there was this kind of disequilibrium. And it was all going through the apostles originally. They were the ones who were taking care of all this, along with their other responsibilities. And yet in verse 2, they say, hold on a second, there's now so much work, it can't just be one person or one small group doing it. And that's why they're saying, okay, we're going to continue to do what we believe God has called us to do in terms of preaching and praying, and then we're going to have others who are going to actually do some of the other work and helping to care for others around. So, what does this mean for us? Let's compare these two for a second, okay? So Bezalel and Stephen. These are a couple of the passages that we put in there. What are some common elements do you see in there from both of them? Filled with the Spirit, yeah, okay. Okay, so filled with the Spirit, has wisdom, yeah. What else? They had an expertise, right, in this specific area. Bezalel, it was with crafts and creating things. We would have presumed that with Stephen and the others, they had some kind of administrative gifts to actually do that work. Okay? Yeah, what else? Anything else in here? They've been called to do something, right? They've been given that responsibility to do something. You may be familiar with, I realized that didn't jump the way I thought. That's fine. So one of the things, as we look at this passage for today, in 1 Peter chapter 4, now Peter, you remember, was one of those 12 disciples. It was one of those 12, actually, we just read about in Acts chapter 6, where they were saying, there's all this work, this is what we believe God has called us to do, and we're going to ask others to get involved in different ways. And so Peter then, near the end of his life, writes this letter. And this letter is circulated. If you look in this map, it's under that kind of number 2 section there. So just to kind of give you a bit of a geographical layout, Mediterranean Sea. If you look to the top left, that's basically Italy. So where you see Rome, Italy, looks like a boot in the sky. And then you've got in the middle there, in the upper part, that's known as Asia Minor, so that's where you're looking at places like Turkey and those kinds of places. If you look a little more to the right, along that east coast part, that's where you start seeing Syria, Israel, those parts. And so Peter is writing this letter near the end of his life to these group of churches in what's considered Asia Minor. Now, during that time, especially in the Roman Empire, so Peter was like, this letter was written. People are debating around between 62 to 65 AD, give or take. It's around that time. And Nero was the emperor of Rome at that time. Now, Nero, if you ever read about this in history, not exactly the greatest guy. Had a bit of an ego, and then felt very threatened at times. Around AD 64, there was the Great Fire of Rome. Right? Basically wiped out almost all of Rome. Now, there's a speculation about who set the fire, but one of the things that happened was Nero actually blamed the Christians for this. And so there's this persecution that's happening now. Amongst the Roman Empire, there's this blame now of saying it's the Christians who caused this, we've got to take them out. And so Peter then writes this. This is one of the reasons why in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7, right? He says the end of the world is coming soon. Because there's a sense of, there's this big pressure that's happening within the church at that time from everyone else. And so he says, and so the people, they need encouragement. So Peter, as one of the first disciples, essentially seen as the leader of the church, one of the leaders of the church, sends his letter out to encourage them. And then one of the things he says is in verse 10. I'm going to ask us to all read this together on a count of 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. So look specifically at this, right? Peter, as this church is facing persecution, as they're facing pressure, as they're feeling this tension, as they're wondering, maybe in the midst of it, where is Jesus? Peter's reminding them that not just to gather, but he says to them, God has given each of you a gift, maybe even a variety of gifts. And he says, use them well to serve one another. The fact is, whether you are someone who is trying to understand what it means to follow Jesus, maybe you're someone who's just started following and you're trying to understand, well, how does this all work? Maybe you're someone who's been following Jesus for several years, several decades, right? No matter where you are in that spectrum, each one of us has been given certain gifts, certain skills. The question, though, now is that, well, what do you do with it? I would suggest that in every pockets, these pockets that we call churches, so whether you're Mimico Baptist, whether you are Hope Church just next door, whether you are Mimico Presbyterian a few feet away, or whether you're part of a different congregation, whatever pocket you're part of, I believe that God has given every single pocket a specific mandate, a specific responsibility for this part in time to fulfill, to live out. Each of us have different responsibilities. Some of it overlaps somewhat, right? In terms of making disciples, that part overlaps, but how that happens, how that works is very distinct in these different pockets. Within each pocket, I would suggest that God has provided every gift and skill needed for that pocket to fulfill the responsibilities God has given them. So then one question is, as Mimico Baptist Church, first of all, reminding ourselves, what exactly are those responsibilities? What is that mandate that God has given us? And for those of you who may be part of a different congregation, maybe ask that question. If I'm part of that congregation, what does it mean for us to, what exactly has God challenged us to do for this season? And then with that then, okay, if you are part of this community we call Mimico Baptist Church, then what is your piece in that? Far too long, in many churches, they presume if you pay someone to do it, they'll just do it. They presume we hire a pastor, the pastor will take care of it. The pastor will go out and reach out to the neighborhood. The pastor will make sure that we are cared for. The pastor will make sure the leak in the basement will be fixed. By the way, again, never trust me to fix anything. Right? But that's the thing, is that too many times we have presumed certain people are given that responsibility and that's it. You show up on a Sunday morning and that's it, I'm done. And yet Peter is saying, if you are part of this community, you are given a gift, maybe a series of gifts. The question now is that how does that gift fit into this puzzle we call Mimico Baptist Church? And then therefore, how do you actually fulfill that? How do you live that out? And over the next few months, this is part of what we're going to be figuring out. So maybe for now, here's a couple of questions to consider. Actually, one of the things that I forgot is that verse 8, one of the key premises behind this is that what's driving this is the love of God. Is hopefully your love for Jesus that's driving you to actually fulfill and utilize what God has given you. I'm hoping that you're not going to get involved because you feel pressured and, oh, I guess I should do this. I'm hoping as you discover what those things are, in the next few months, as we as a church are continuously figuring out, okay, what are the different pieces we have? Not just for those who are here right now, but also for those who join on a Friday night, on an 8:30 service, maybe on a Wednesday Bible study, whatever it is, that we will figure out, okay, how does this all fit together? Because the fourth marker is this. The fourth marker is, do I actually use my gifts? How do I contribute to this community? Sub-question is, maybe what do I actually have to offer? And maybe you're not sure about that right now, and that's okay. You know, one of the reasons why we decided to hire this guy is because we believe that in this season, as we are trying to figure out who we are, what is God entrusting us to do in this season, and then with that, how do we actually each live this out? And how do we add in these almost like sub-pockets within Mimico Baptist Church, what does it mean for us to live this out together? So we don't have to figure it all out now, but you at least have to take that responsibility. You at least have to say, okay, I'm trying to figure out what God has gifted me with, both in terms of my gifts as well as my skills. And with that then, how do I now contribute? How do I now be part of what God is calling us to do together? And then through Pastor David, we are going to figure out what those pockets look like. A couple of days ago, he was sharing about some of the things that he experienced during his time away earlier this week. And he's going to get a chance to share some of that now.
And I guess I'm trapped to this microphone. We're talking about being a disciple, being a follower. And for most of my adult life, I assumed that learning about Jesus, in a sense, was enough, and I taught about Jesus. But one of Jesus' life, rhythms of life was, if you read the Gospels, before he went into a period of ministry, or perhaps even after, he would retreat. He would go somewhere to pray and to be alone. So that's where I went, to that rock. See, I've been anticipating the next season of our life at Mimico and feeling a sense of, and I wrote down uncertainty, but that's not exactly the right word, but I don't know what is. So, following Jesus' example, one of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray. He spent the night praying to God. When the morning came, and I stopped it there because the point is he went to seek God. The next part of the verse is he chose the 12 disciples. So after seeking God, he entered a period of significant ministry. So I went away. I went on Monday, came back on Wednesday, and I brought two things with me. First of all, I brought some downloaded guided meditation videos. I brought 5 of them between 10 and 20 minutes long. See, when I sit down to pray, 45 seconds in, I'm wondering if I need to wash the car. I'm wondering, maybe the kids are right. I don't need to match my socks. Maybe Coke is, in fact, better than Pepsi. But, Dave, I don't think. Sit down. Yeah, I don't think so. But see, I needed to focus my attention for a chunk of time. So these videos force me to do that. I do. I pay attention. The voice on the videos reads scripture and then silence. And I have been finding them over the last number of months really helpful. The second thing I brought was one sheet of printed scriptures. Over the course of the last few months, a number of scriptures for various reasons have jumped out at me, so I wrote them down. So then I brought these with me, and I did what is sometimes called a lectio divina, or something in Latin that I don't know, way of reading the Bible. You don't read a big chunk, you read one verse. You read it slowly. You listen to your thoughts. What word jumps out at you? You read it over and over again, just that piece, just that verse, and you listen to your thoughts. And then you sit silently and quietly, that's the same thing, and listen to your thoughts about those verses. What are you hearing? I was seeking some assurances. I've shared with you, I wrestle a little bit with imposter syndrome. And at this period of Mimico's life, I was seeking, I was going to say certainty, but certainly affirmation. And after those days, I heard some affirmations. I am specifically called by God, specifically me, to be part of Mimico Baptist Church for the next little while. Oh, I knew that. But I needed that moment of affirmation. Psalm 16 was one of the psalms I brought with me, and I heard God say he likes me. He takes delight in me. Not just he wants me to work for him. He wants to be with me, and he wants me to be with him. One of the video meditations talked about creation and uses a continuing tense. Not God has created, but God continues to create. And she's not talking about evolution. She's talking about his purposes in the world. And he is continuing to invest in me. And he's interested in the journey, perhaps even more than the destination. So yes, we want to accomplish great things as a church, but maybe more importantly is learning to continue to grow and continue to work together. So Ruby and I returned on Wednesday feeling affirmed and refreshed and grateful and thankful. I heard wolves at 4 o'clock in the morning. That was fabulous. I saw hawks flying around. I saw a beaver swim close to my canoe, and when it saw me, splash its tail. I saw the Big Dipper as clearly as I've ever seen it, and I felt deeply God's presence and pleasure and calling for me.
So before we continue in worship, let's go back to those questions. How will you contribute to the community of Mimico Baptist Church? And don't rush that. Because the flip side of that too is I know for some of you, you're contributing a lot. Maybe the question is that everything you're supposed to be contributing to? And then even the question, what do I have to offer? We're not just talking about your resources, we're talking about what has God actually given you to use now? Maybe there are certain skills that you think, well, that's something. Maybe some of you are good at accounting. If so, our finance team could probably use your help. Some of you are great at renovation stuff. Cool. One of the things that I think God has gifted me with is a way to organize. This is part of the reason why I think I'm in this role right now, is to actually help us to actually put in what we need to actually hopefully work better together. So using the skills that God has given me and hopefully the wisdom to use them well. So take a moment before Jan continues to lead us in worship. Take a moment in the silence for those of you who are part of Mimico Baptist Church, or whether you're part of a different congregation, ask yourself this: how will I contribute to this community?